All right, get ready, because we're diving deep today into Asian history and culture. We've got a ton of your research notes about Islam, India, and China. Oh, and even a little bit about Japan, too. Should be fun.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how these cultures across such huge distances, really influenced and shaped each other over time.
Absolutely. So let's jump right in. First question from the notes. What are the three Abrahamic religions, and what makes them similar?
Okay, so the three Abrahamic religions are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And the thing they all share is that they are monotheistic religions, meaning they believe in just one God.
Interesting. So they all come from this shared idea of one God. Okay, next question. Muslims believe they are descended from which son of Abraham?
Muslims trace their lineage back to Abraham through his son, Ishmael. In Islam, Ishmael is considered a prophet.
Makes sense. So that lineage helps us see the historical and theological connection between these different faiths. Okay, let's move on to Islamic architecture. What's the name for a Muslim house of worship, and what's that architectural feature that often gives it away?
A Muslim house of worship is called a mosque. And yeah, you're probably thinking of the minaret, right? It's that tall, slender tower.
Yeah, minarets, they're beautiful.
They are. And they're important too. The call to prayer is made from the minaret.
Okay, now on to Islamic art. What are some of the common types, and what's something you usually don't see depicted?
So there are three main types of Islamic art. There's arabesque, which has those super intricate designs with flowers and plants. Then there's geometric patterns. Those are amazing. They create these really cool visual rhythms. And then, of course, you have calligraphy. It's like writing, but elevated to an art form. But one thing you won't often see is depictions of humans or animals.
Oh, right, there are theological reasons for that, aren't there?
Exactly.
So that really pushes the focus onto the spiritual side of things.
Let's talk math now. Your notes ask about achievements made by Islamic scholars in mathematics. Oh, yeah. Islamic scholars did some pretty amazing things. They developed algebra, which, completely revolutionized how we solve equations, and they played a key role in spreading the use of Arabic numerals.
Wait, the system we use today?
Yep, that's the one.
Wow. Think about trying to do math with Roman numerals. Can't even imagine. Islamic scholars were really ahead of their time. Okay, moving on to the origins of Islam. Your notes ask who founded Islam and what his successors were called.
Islam was founded by the Prophet Muhammad in the 7th century CE, and his successors, the leaders of the Muslim community after him, were called caliphs.
So the caliphs carried on his legacy.
Right, they guided the early Muslim community.
Got it. And who was the first caliph?
The first caliph was Abu Bakr. He was a close companion of the Prophet Muhammad and also his father-in-law.
He must have been really important then to the early development and spread of Islam. Now, about the Holy Book of Islam, what's it called?
The Holy Book of Islam is called the Quran. Muslims believe it's the word of God revealed to the Prophet Muhammad.
So the Quran guides Muslims in their faith and practice. Fascinating. Your notes then ask about one of the most basic beliefs in Islam. It's the first of the 5 pillars of Islam, right? What is it?
Yes, the first pillar is the Declaration of Faith. It goes, "There is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God."
Powerful stuff. That statement really sums up the core of Islamic belief. Now, let's talk about this fascinating historical figure. You're curious about Mansa Musa and his accomplishments.
Mansa Musa. He was an incredibly wealthy and devout Muslim ruler of the Mali Empire in West Africa. He's famous for his pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324.
His pilgrimage. Wasn't that a huge spectacle?
Oh, yeah, totally. He traveled with a massive entourage, massive, and supposedly brought tons of gold with him. Literal tons, which he very generously distributed along the way. His pilgrimage really showed the world the wealth and influence of the Mali Empire.
Wow. That must have left quite an impression on everyone who saw it. Speaking of Mecca, your notes bring up its significance. Why is it the most important city for Muslims?
Mecca is the holiest city in Islam. It's located in modern-day Saudi Arabia. It's the birthplace of the Prophet Muhammad and is home to the Kaaba, the most sacred site in Islam.
The Kaaba, that's that cube-shaped structure Muslims circle during the Hajj, right?
That's it. It's a powerful symbol of unity and devotion for Muslims around the world.
It's amazing how such a structure can hold such deep religious and cultural meaning. Okay, let's compare 2 major Islamic empires now. Which one was in India and which one conquered the Byzantine Empire?
The Islamic Empire in India was the Mughal Empire. They were known for their incredible architecture and cultural achievements. And the empire that conquered the Byzantine Empire was the Ottoman Empire.
Ah, right. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 was a huge turning point in history. It reshaped Europe and the Middle East. Okay, let's move on to India. Your notes ask about the origins of three major religions. Which three religions started in India, and did any of them spread to East Asia?
So Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism all originated in India. And Buddhism, with its focus on enlightenment and escaping suffering, spread widely throughout East Asia. It became a major religion in countries like China, Japan, and Korea.
Wow, that's pretty far-reaching. It shows how connected cultures can be, even across huge distances. Speaking of connections, your notes ask about India's most valuable export.
Spices. They were India's most valuable export to the West, especially pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg.
I can just imagine how valuable those spices must have been. They literally drove global trade routes and exploration. Now let's dive into some key concepts from Hinduism. What are the Hindu terms for reincarnation and escaping from that endless cycle of death and rebirth?
The term for reincarnation is samsara. It refers to that continuous cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. And the concept of breaking free from that cycle, of achieving liberation, that's called moksha.
Okay, so samsara is the cycle, and moksha is the goal of escaping it. Got it.
Mm.
Your notes also ask about the Bhakti movement in Hinduism. What was that all about?
The Bhakti movement emerged in Hinduism around the 6th century CE. It stressed having a personal and emotional connection with God, through devotion, prayer, and chanting.
So it was a more devotional and personal approach to finding spiritual enlightenment. Interesting. Now let's talk about the Gupta Golden Age. What writing system became really important during that time, and was there some significant Hindu philosophical text that was finished during this era?
During the Gupta Golden Age, Sanskrit flourished as the language of literature and scholarship. And yes, you're right, that's when the Bhagavad Gita, a super important Hindu text, was completed.
The Gupta era sounds like a pretty intellectually and culturally rich period. Your notes mention a guy named Aryabhata, a prominent figure from this era. What were some of his accomplishments?
Aryabhata was a brilliant mathematician and astronomer who lived during the Gupta era. He managed to calculate pi to a remarkably accurate degree. He also figured out that the Earth rotates on its axis and revolves around the sun, and that the moon and planets actually just reflect the sun's light.
Wow. So he was centuries ahead of his time in his understanding of the cosmos. Now let's jump over to China. Who was that unique figure in Chinese history, the only woman to ever rule China in her own right?
That would be Empress Wu Zetian, a truly remarkable figure who ruled during the Tang Dynasty.
Empress Wu. That's incredible. She defied all the societal norms to achieve that level of power. Your notes mention Emperor Wen of the Sui dynasty. What did he build to improve transportation?
Emperor Wen oversaw the construction of the Grand Canal, a massive waterway. It connected the north and south of China, which really helped with trade and transportation.
Wow, the Grand Canal. That must have been a major feat of engineering.
Yeah.
Definitely speaks to the ingenuity of Chinese civilization. Let's talk about Chinese belief systems. What are the three main ones that originated in China?
Okay, so the three main belief systems are Taoism, legalism, and Confucianism. Each one offers a different take on how to live a harmonious life and how society should be governed.
And these philosophies have shaped Chinese culture and thought for centuries, right? Okay, your notes dig a little deeper into Confucianism. What was Confucius's view on how a government should function?
Confucius believed the ideal government is led by educated, virtuous men who put the people's needs first. He really emphasized ethical behavior, respect for authority, and harmony within society.
His teachings really highlight the importance of good, moral leadership and a sense of social responsibility. So how did the Tang, Song, and Ming dynasties use Confucian ideas in their governments?
They implemented something called the civil service examination system. It was super rigorous and based on Confucian principles. They used it to choose scholar officials for government positions. It was a merit-based system designed to create an effective and honest bureaucracy.
So Confucianism actually had a direct impact on Chinese bureaucracy for centuries.
That's fascinating.
Now, your notes ask about the origins of Buddhism and its ultimate goal.
Buddhism was founded by Siddhartha Gautama, who later became known as the Buddha, which means the enlightened one. And the goal in Buddhism is to achieve enlightenment, or nirvana, which is essentially liberation from suffering.
So it's all about finding a way to transcend suffering and reaching a state of peace and understanding. Makes sense. When did Buddhism become popular in China, and what led to its spread?
Buddhism really started gaining a following in China during the period of disunion. It was a pretty rough time, lots of political instability and social unrest after the collapse of the Han Dynasty. People were looking for some kind of comfort and meaning amidst all the suffering and chaos.
So Buddhism provided a source of hope and stability during those turbulent times. Your notes ask about the dynasty that's considered the golden age of medieval China. Which one is it?
The Song dynasty is often seen as the golden age of medieval China.
What made it so special?
The Song dynasty was a time of incredible advancements in, well, pretty much everything. Urbanization, the economy, social mobility, and the arts and sciences flourished. Plus, there were some big innovations, like the development of smallpox inoculation and the expansion of public schools.
It sounds like a truly dynamic and progressive era. You mentioned medical advancements. What were some of the notable achievements made during the Song dynasty?
Oh, one of the most significant was the development of smallpox inoculation. It was like an early version of vaccination. Pretty innovative approach to fighting disease, right?
Yeah, they were definitely ahead of the curve. Let's talk about the Mongols now, that powerful force that swept across Asia. Who were they and where did they come from?
The Mongols were nomadic horsemen from the steppes of Central Asia. They were incredible on horseback, seriously skilled. And they were known for their military prowess and their ability to adapt, which is probably why they conquered so much land.
Didn't Genghis Khan unite the Mongol tribes?
Yep, that's him. Genghis Khan unified the Mongols in the early 13th century and led them on a series of conquests. They created the largest contiguous land empire in history. Pretty impressive.
Genghis Khan. Definitely a name that's become synonymous with military brilliance, but also with brutality. Let's talk about the Yuan dynasty now. What happened during that period and who was the first emperor?
The Yuan dynasty was founded by Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, in 1279. This was a big deal because it was the first time all of China was ruled by a foreign power.
That must have been a huge shift for the Chinese people.
It was. The Mongols, they had their own customs, but they did adopt some Chinese culture too. Trade between East and West increased, but the Yuan dynasty also did away with the civil service examination system, which was a pretty big break from traditional Chinese governance.
So they brought change, but also disruption. Gotcha. Okay, let's move on to the Ming dynasty. What were some of the key things that happened during that period?
The Ming dynasty overthrew the Yuan dynasty in 1368, and that brought native Chinese rule back. During this time, they had some super ambitious construction projects, like the Forbidden City, expanding the Great Wall, and rebuilding the Grand Canal. Plus, it was a time of exploration marked by the famous voyages of Zheng He.
The Forbidden City is truly an incredible piece of architecture.
It is. It served as the imperial palace for centuries. It's like a symbol of the power and grandeur of the Ming dynasty.
And what about Zheng He's voyages? I mean, he led this huge fleet across the Indian Ocean all the way to Africa.
Yeah, Zheng He's voyages were remarkable. They were on a scale that was pretty much unheard of at the time.
Right. But your notes mentioned that the Ming dynasty eventually shifted towards isolationism.
Yeah, towards the end, they started restricting foreign trade and limiting contact with the outside world. It seems like a bit of a contradiction after all that exploration, huh?
Yeah, it's an interesting shift in policy. Okay, let's talk about cultural exchange between China and Japan. What aspects of Chinese culture made their way to Japan during the Nara period, and who was responsible for that?
The Nara period, from 710 to 794 CE, was a time when Japan really embraced a lot of Chinese culture. They adopted the Chinese writing system, which is known as kanji, they embraced Buddhism, and they even started incorporating Chinese architectural styles into their temples and palaces.
So basically, a wave of Chinese influence swept over Japan. That's pretty amazing. Who is the driving force behind this?
Well, a lot of it can be attributed to Prince Shotoku, a powerful regent who ruled Japan in the late 6th and early 7th centuries. He really pushed for these cultural exchanges. He saw the value in learning from China's advanced civilization.
He sounds like a pretty visionary leader, someone who was open to embracing new ideas and adapting them to fit his own culture. Tell me about the Heian period in Japan. What was that era like?
The Heian period, from 794 to 1185 CE, is considered a golden age for Japanese art and literature. The imperial court in Kyoto developed a very refined, elegant culture. They produced some beautiful works of poetry, prose, and visual art, often focusing on themes of beauty and courtly love.
It sounds like a period of great creativity and artistic expression. Your notes mention a particular literary achievement. Who wrote what's considered the first novel, and what was it called?
That would be The Tale of Genji, written by a noblewoman named Lady Murasaki Shikibu during the Heian period. It's widely regarded as the world's first novel, and it gives us a fascinating look into the lives and intrigues of the Heian court.
The Tale of Genji, a true classic of Japanese literature. Okay, let's talk about how power was structured in feudal Japan. Who held the real power during that era, and what was the emperor's role?
In feudal Japan, the real power rested with the shogun, who was the military leader. The emperor was more of a symbolic figurehead with limited actual political authority.
So the shogun was the one calling the shots, controlling the military, and shaping the direction of Japan. Now let's get into the samurai. Your notes are curious about their expectations, duties, weapons, tactics, their code of conduct, and even their preferred religion.
Okay, well, the samurai were elite warriors, but they were more than just fighters. They had this super strict code of conduct called Bushido, which emphasized honor, courage, and unwavering loyalty above all else.
Bushido. Sounds like pretty demanding code to live by.
It was. Samurai were expected to uphold these values even in the face of death. Their primary duty was to serve and protect their lord, known as a daimyo, and his land. They were masters of swordsmanship. Their main weapon was the katana, a curved, single-edged sword. And they were also skilled in archery, horsemanship, and all sorts of other weapons and tactics.
And what about their religious beliefs?
Well, Zen Buddhism had a really strong influence on samurai culture, with its focus on discipline, mindfulness, and acceptance of death.
I see. So Zen Buddhism provided a sort of spiritual framework for their warrior way of life. Okay, last question for this part. Your notes ask about the Sengoku Jidai and the beginning of the Edo period.
Ah, yes. The Sengoku Jidai, which lasted from the mid-15th to the early 17th century, was a wild time in Japan. It was a period of warring states. Basically, all these different daimyo were battling each other for control, which meant there was constant conflict and chaos.
It sounds like a time of huge instability and upheaval.
It was, lots of shifting alliances and battles. But it finally came to an end when Tokugawa Ieyasu won the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600. He became shogun and unified Japan, which brought about the Edo period.
So Tokugawa Ieyasu was the one who finally brought an end to the chaos and ushered in an era of peace and stability.
Exactly. And he also moved the capital to Edo, which is present-day Tokyo. The Edo period was a time of massive change for Japan. They closed themselves off from the outside world and established a strict social hierarchy. But it was also a time of economic growth, cultural development, and relative peace, which was a pretty big contrast to the Sengoku Jidai that came before it.
That is an amazing transformation. It's incredible how adaptable Japanese culture is, how they were able to go through such intense changes and come out stronger on the other side.
It really shows their resilience and their ability to learn and grow from all kinds of experiences.
We've covered so much ground in this first part. From the rise of Islam, to the Mongol conquest, to the world of the samurai. It's mind-blowing how interconnected these different cultures and historical events really are.
I know, right? It's amazing.
This deep dive has been a fantastic journey through the rich tapestry of Asian history and culture. If you're as fascinated by all this as we are, there's so many more avenues to explore. Happy researching.